He howled for the first time, and the whole neighborhood heard his pain. The chain was all Shadow had ever known. It wasn't always like this. Once, a long time ago, when he was just a clumsy pup with bright eyes and a wagging tail, there had been warmth. A human hand had stroked his fur. A voice, rough but not unkind, had called him a good boy. But that time had faded like a dream. Now Shadow's world was a small patch of dirt behind a house that smelled of old cigarettes and regret. The chain around his neck was heavy, rusted, and tight enough to leave marks on his skin. It stretched just far enough for him to reach a dented metal bowl, though most days there was nothing in it but rainwater and dead leaves. Shadow had learned that whining did no good. Barking only made things worse. His owner, Hank, was a tall, hollow-eyed man with an angry look that never softened. Shadow didn't understand much about humans, but he understood Hank's moods. The sound of ice clinking in a glass meant Hank would soon stumble outside, muttering under his breath. The slam of the screen door meant a long night alone. And if Hank's boots crunched toward him in the dark, it was best to curl up small and stay very, very still. The worst was the hunger. Some days Hank remembered to toss out a crust of bread or a bone already chewed clean. Other days, Shadow had to rely on luck. Maybe a bird would drop something. Maybe the wind would blow in a scrap of food. The hunger gnawed at him constantly, making his ribs press against his thin coat. But worse than hunger was the loneliness. Shadow watched the world beyond the fence with silent longing. He saw squirrels racing up trees, birds gliding through the sky, and sometimes, just sometimes, he saw other dogs. Dogs who ran freely beside their humans, tails wagging. Dogs who sniffed at the ground, played in the grass, and slept in warm beds. Shadow didn't know how long he had been chained. Days, months, maybe years. Time felt like a long, endless night, broken only by the rising and setting of the sun. He had long since stopped dreaming of freedom. Then one summer evening, something changed. A car rumbled up the driveway next door. Shadow lifted his head, ears twitching at the sound. He had lived in this backyard long enough to know that the old house beside Hank's had been empty for a long time. But now voices filled the air. New voices. Shadow stayed still, listening. A girl's voice. Young, soft, but full of excitement. A mother's voice. Tired but patient. The car doors slammed. Footsteps crunched on the gravel. And then through a small gap in the fence, Shadow saw her. A girl, maybe 10 years old, with dark curls bouncing as she moved. She wore a faded yellow t-shirt and sneakers that were too clean, too new for this dusty old town. She carried a box in her hands and walked toward the porch, talking to the woman behind her. "Mom, this place is kind of old," the girl said. "It's what we can afford right now, Lena," her mother replied. "We'll make it home." Lena. Shadow perked up, watching as she set down the box and stretched, looking around. Then, as if she sensed something, her eyes drifted toward the fence. Her gaze locked onto him. Shadow tensed. Most people ignored him. Others looked at him with annoyance, like he was a stray not worth their time. But Lena didn't look away. Her eyes, big and brown, widened as she took a small step closer. "Mom," she whispered, "there's a dog." Her mother barely glanced up. "Lena, don't go near it. It might be dangerous." Dangerous? Shadow's ears drooped. He had never been dangerous a day in his life. Lena frowned but didn't step back. She looked at the rusty chain, at the dirt patch, at his thin body. Then the most unexpected thing happened. She smiled. Not a sad smile, not a nervous one, a real one. "Hey boy," she said gently, "what's your name?" Shadow didn't have a name, not one that mattered anyway. Hank called him stupid mud or worthless, when he even bothered to acknowledge him. But when Lena spoke, something in her voice made his tail twitch, a tiny movement, barely noticeable. She knelt, her fingers curling around the chain-link fence. "You look hungry," she whispered. "Hold on, okay?" Shadow didn't move as she disappeared into the house. Minutes later, she was back. She glanced over her shoulder, checking that no one was watching. Then she slipped something through the fence, a piece of chicken wrapped in a napkin. The smell hit Shadow like a shockwave. His stomach twisted with need, but he hesitated. Lena's voice was barely a whisper. "Go on, it's okay." Shadow took a shaky step forward, then another. He lowered his head, sniffed, and, before he could think better of it, snatched the chicken, chewing so fast he barely tasted it. Lena giggled. Wow, you were really hungry, huh? Shadow licked his lips, his body trembling. No one had ever fed him like that before. From the porch, her mother called, "Lena, come help me unpack." Lena hesitated. "I'll be back," she promised. "Tomorrow, okay?" Shadow didn't understand her words, but he understood the way she looked at him. Like he mattered. Like he wasn't just some forgotten thing rusting away in a backyard. As she ran inside, the yard grew quiet again. Shadow curled up on his patch of dirt, but something was different. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel invisible. For the first time, someone had noticed him. And maybe, just maybe, tomorrow would be different.
Shadow had never looked forward to a day before. Days were all the same, empty, hungry, lonely. But this morning was different, because today Lena had promised to come back. He kept his eyes on the fence, his ears twitching at every sound. The sun rose higher, bathing the yard in warm light, but Shadow barely moved from his spot. He didn't even notice his empty food bowl or the ache in his legs. Then the moment finally came. The screen door next door creaked open and footsteps pitter-pattered on the porch. Shadow lifted his head, and there she was, Lena. She spotted him immediately and grinned. "Hey, boy!" Shadow's tail wagged just a little before he could stop himself. Lena dropped to her knees by the fence, reaching into her pocket. "I brought something for you," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder as if checking for her mother. She pulled out a piece of bread, not much, but it was food. Shadow's stomach twisted with hunger, but this time he hesitated. Yesterday, she had given him chicken. Today, it was bread. What if tomorrow she didn't come at all? Lena saw the doubt in his eyes and frowned. "It's okay," she said softly. "I won't hurt you." Shadow inched forward. His ribs brushed against the chain as he stretched his neck to take the bread. "Good boy," Lena whispered, smiling as he swallowed it in one gulp. She was so close. If not for the fence, Shadow could have leaned into her touch. "Lena." The sharp voice made Shadow flinch. He backed away quickly, his body trembling. Lena jumped up. "Mom, I told you not to go near that dog." Her mother, Mrs. Carter, said firmly, stepping out onto the porch. Lena pouted. "But he's not dangerous. He's not our dog, Lena, and we don't know if he's sick or if he bites." Shadow didn't understand the words, but he understood the disappointment in Lena's face. Mrs. Carter sighed. "Come inside, sweetie." Lena hesitated. She turned back to Shadow, her expression soft. "I'll be back later," she promised. Shadow lay down as she left, feeling the familiar weight of loneliness settle over him, but this time it wasn't as heavy as before. Days passed. Each morning, Shadow waited. Each afternoon, Lena came back. She never brought much, sometimes a piece of an apple, sometimes a bit of her sandwich, but it wasn't the food that mattered. It was the way she talked to him. She told him about her old home in the city, how she missed her dad, how she didn't have any friends here yet. "You're my only friend right now," she whispered one evening. Shadow didn't understand the words, but he understood her voice, gentle, warm, kind, and little by little he changed. His tail wagged more. His ears perked up when he heard her voice. For the first time in his life, he felt something close to happiness. But happiness was a fragile thing. One evening, the peace shattered. Lena had just given Shadow a scrap of cheese when the screen door next door slammed open. Shadow, his body tensed, heart pounding. "Hank!" The drunken man stumbled onto the porch, a half-empty bottle swinging from his fingers. His bleary eyes scanned the yard, locking onto Lena. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Lena jumped back, her face going pale. Hank stepped forward, swaying slightly. "That mutt ain't yours. Stay away from it." Shadow shrank back as Hank's gaze flickered to him. "You useless, flea-ridden—" Crack! Hank kicked the empty metal bowl across the yard, sending it skidding in the dirt. Shadow flinched at the sound. Lena's small fists clenched. "You can't treat him like this." Hank let out a bitter laugh. "You think you can tell me what to do, little girl?" He took another swig from his bottle, then scowled. "Get lost before I tell your mom you've been sneaking around here." Lena's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't move. For a second, Shadow thought she was going to fight him. Then a voice called from the house. "Lena, come inside now, Mrs. Carter." Lena hesitated, then backed away. She looked at Shadow, guilt written all over her face. Shadow watched her go, his heart sinking. He had seen that look before. It was the look people gave when they realized they couldn't win. That night, Shadow shivered in the cold, curling up as small as he could. Hank had never cared about Lena feeding him before, but now he had noticed, and that meant only one thing. Sooner or later, something bad was going to happen, and Shadow was right. The next day, Lena didn't come. Not that day, not the next. Days passed, and the hope that had bloomed inside Shadow withered. Had she abandoned him? Had Hank scared her away forever? Shadow stopped wagging his tail. He stopped looking toward the fence. By the fourth day, he stopped hoping at all. On the fifth night, the sound of footsteps woke him. Shadow lifted his head. His body ached from hunger, but something was different. Someone was coming. Then a whisper. "Shadow?" His ears perked up. Lena. She crouched by the fence, her face barely visible in the moonlight. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Mom wouldn't let me come. I had to wait until she was asleep." Shadow stood, his heart pounding. Then he saw what she was holding. Wire cutters. She fumbled with the fence, biting her lip. "I have to get you out," she whispered. Shadow's pulse raced. Freedom. He had never even dared to dream of it, but now, a low growl rumbled through the yard. Shadow's ears flattened. Hank. He was standing in the doorway, watching them. And he did not look happy. "You stupid little brat," he slurred, stepping forward. Lena froze. Shadow's breath caught in his throat. Hank's eyes darkened, and he reached for his belt. Shadow's body reacted before his mind could think. For the first time in his life, he growled, a deep, low warning sound. For the first time, he stood his ground. Hank sneered. "What are you going to do, huh? Bite me." Then, Shadow did something no one expected. He threw back his head and howled. A long, haunting cry that ripped through the night like a siren. The sound carried through the neighborhood, waking every house on the block. And, for the first time in his life, Shadow was heard. Shadow's howl tore through the night. It wasn't just a sound, it was a cry, a call for help, a desperate plea that no one had ever answered before. For a moment, everything froze. Lena stared at him, eyes wide. Hank staggered back, caught off guard. Even the wind seemed to pause, carrying Shadow's voice across the empty streets. Then, lights flicked on in houses nearby. A porch light, a window, then another. Dogs barked in the distance. Somewhere a baby cried. Shadow had never made a sound like that before. He had spent his life silent, afraid, too broken to fight back. But now something inside him had snapped free, and people heard him. A neighbor intervenes. "Hey, what's going on over there?" The voice came from across the street. A man, Mr. Dawson, an older neighbor with silver hair and sharp eyes, stood on his porch, peering through the darkness. A few more doors creaked open, curious faces appearing. Lena took a shaky step back as Hank turned, rage twisting his features. "Mind your own damn business, Dawson," Hank barked, his words slurred from alcohol. But Mr. Dawson didn't move. Instead, his eyes narrowed as he spotted Shadow. "That dog still chained up?" he muttered. "Damn shame." A woman's voice cut through the night. "Mom, call the police." It was another neighbor, a teenage girl, standing barefoot on her porch. Her mother, inside the house, reached for the phone. Hank's jaw clenched. He took a step toward Lena, his hand tightening into a fist. "You little—" "Stop!" The word burst out of Lena's mouth, louder than she had ever shouted before. Hank froze. Shadow's growl deepened. His body was still weak, still trembling from hunger, but for the first time he stood tall. A siren wailed in the distance. Hank's head snapped up, his body stiffened. Someone had really called the police. Minutes later, the flashing red and blue lights of a police car flooded the yard. Two officers stepped out. One was Officer Reed, a tall woman with a no-nonsense expression. Hank let out a bitter laugh. "What, you arresting me for yelling at some brat?" Officer Reed didn't reply. Her sharp gaze landed on Shadow, his thin body, his matted fur, the rusted chain around his neck. And her expression changed. A flicker of something, anger, sadness, maybe both. "You own this dog?" she asked. Hank scowled. "So what if I do?" Officer Reed knelt down, reaching out her hand. Shadow flinched at first, expecting pain, but she didn't hit him. She sighed, shaking her head. "Poor boy," she murmured. Then she stood. Unchain him. Hank snorted. Like hell I will. Her partner, a shorter officer with tired eyes, stepped forward. Sir, either you unchain him or we do. For a moment, Hank looked like he might fight. Then he saw the neighbors watching. The police. The way Lena was still standing there, unafraid, and something in him gave up. With a bitter curse, he stumbled toward the chain, fumbling with the lock. His hands were shaking, and after a moment, he growled in frustration and kicked the lock instead. It snapped open. The chain fell to the ground. Shadow staggered forward, suddenly feeling light, too light. He had never known what it was like to not be weighed down. Lena gasped, her hands clapping over her mouth. Shadow took a shaky step, then another. Then he looked up at the sky. He had never noticed how big it was before. For the first time in years, he was free. The next few hours passed in a blur. Hank was taken away in the police car, cursing under his breath. Neighbors murmured to each other, shaking their heads. Lena and her mother stood near the fence, watching as Officer Reed knelt beside Shadow. He's in bad shape, she muttered. He needs a vet, food, a safe place. Lena grabbed her mother's arm. Can we take him, please? Mrs. Carter hesitated. She looked at Shadow, really looked at him. The thin frame, the scars, the way his legs wobbled with exhaustion. He needs help, she murmured. I don't know if we're ready for that. Lena's heart sank. Officer Reed sighed. We'll take him to the shelter, she said gently. He'll get medical care, and then they'll look for a home. Lena felt sick. A shelter? Would he end up in a cold cage again? Would someone else chain him up? She couldn't let that happen. As Officer Reed reached for Shadow, he made a decision. His legs were weak, his body was exhausted, but he did the one thing he had never dared to do before. He stepped toward Lena. Lena's eyes filled with tears. Shadow's dark brown eyes met hers. Don't leave me. Lena grabbed her mother's hand. Please, she whispered. He trusts me. He came to me. Mrs. Carter exhaled slowly. She looked at her daughter, then at the dog, standing there, so small, so broken, but still fighting. Then finally, okay. Lena burst into tears. Officer Reed smiled. That settles it then. She pulled out her notebook, scribbling something down. We'll check in on him, make sure he's doing okay. Lena knelt, gently stroking Shadow's head. You're safe now, she whispered. Shadow didn't understand her words, but he felt them. For the first time in his life, he belonged to someone. That night, Shadow curled up inside a house for the first time ever. The floor was soft. The air was warm. He lay on a blanket in the laundry room, still too weak to move much. Lena sat beside him, whispering softly, her fingers running gently over his fur. Shadow's eyes grew heavy. For years, sleep had been dangerous. He had to be alert, ready for a kick, for hunger, for pain. But tonight, as Lena hummed softly, her presence steady and warm, something inside him let go. His eyes closed, his breath slowed, and for the first time in his life, Shadow slept without fear. Shadow had never known silence like this. Not the kind of silence that meant loneliness, not the kind that came before a storm or a kick. This was different. This was peace. For the first time in his life, he had slept without fear. And now, as the morning light streamed through the window, he opened his eyes, and everything felt new. The first morning of freedom. Lena sat cross-legged beside him, blinking sleep from her eyes. She had stayed with him all night, curled up with a pillow and blanket on the laundry room floor. When Shadow shifted, her face lit up. Hey, bud, he whispered. Good morning. Shadow stretched his front legs, wincing slightly. His muscles were stiff, his body weak, but it didn't hurt as much as before. And most importantly, he wasn't outside. He wasn't cold. He wasn't chained. He was inside a home. Lena reached out, fingers hovering just above his fur. Can I? Shadow hesitated, then lowered his head against her hand. Lena let out a small, shaky breath, a mix of relief and joy. You're safe now, she whispered. And this time Shadow believed it. But freedom was strange. The world inside the house was different from the yard he had known all his life. There were new sounds, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, the quiet footsteps of Mrs. Carter moving in the kitchen. There were new smells, fresh laundry, pancakes, shampoo, and worst of all, there was space. Too much space. Shadow wasn't used to moving without being stopped by a chain. When Lena led him slowly through the house, he took small, careful steps. And then the floor creaked. Shadow flinched hard, his whole body tensing. Lena froze. "It's okay," she said quickly. "It's just the floor." But Shadow didn't understand. In his old life, sudden noises meant danger. Loud footsteps meant Hank was coming. A slammed door meant punishment. So he cowered, his body lowering to the floor. Lena's heart broke. She crouched beside him, keeping her voice soft. It's okay, boy. You don't have to be scared anymore." Shadow's breathing was fast, shallow. His eyes darted around the room, searching for something familiar, something safe. Lena reached into her pocket and pulled out a tiny piece of cheese. Shadow's ears twitched. "You like cheese, right?" she coaxed, holding it out. His body shook, but his hunger was stronger than his fear. Slowly, he took a step forward, just one, then another. Then he gently took the cheese from her fingers. Lena beamed. "Good boy." Shadow swallowed, his tail twitching slightly. Maybe, just maybe, this place wasn't so bad. At breakfast, Mrs. Carter sat across from Lena at the table, watching as Shadow curled up in the corner. "He's still scared," she murmured. Lena nodded. "I know, but he's getting better." Mrs. Carter tapped her fingers on the table. "Are you sure we can handle this, honey? He's been through a lot." Lena's stomach tightened. "I can do it," she said quickly. "I promise. I'll take care of him. I'll train him. Her mother sighed, rubbing her temples. "It's not just about feeding him, Lena. He's been abused. He's traumatized." Lena swallowed hard. "But I can help him." Mrs. Carter hesitated. Then finally she nodded. "All right, but if it gets too much, we'll have to talk about other options." Lena didn't let herself think about what that meant. Shadow was hers. She wouldn't let him go. The days that followed were slow. Shadow didn't trust quickly. He still flinched at sudden movements, still froze when a loud noise startled him. But every morning, Lena sat beside him, talking softly. She let him move at his own pace. She didn't force him to go outside. She didn't pull him or shout at him. And little by little, he changed. One afternoon, Lena sat in the backyard, rolling a small blue ball in her hands. She turned to Shadow, who sat a few feet away, watching her cautiously. "You ever played before?" she asked. Shadow just blinked. Lena smiled and gently rolled the ball toward him. It stopped near his paws. Shadow stared at it. Then slowly, he sniffed it. Lena held her breath. For a moment, it seemed like nothing would happen. Then, the tiniest flicker of curiosity sparked in his eyes. He nudged the ball. Lena gasped. "Yes, that's it." Shadow blinked at her excitement. His tail gave the smallest wag. Something stirred inside him. He nudged the ball again. And for the first time in his life, he played. But healing wasn't just about play. It was also about the past. At night, the nightmares came. Lena woke up to whimpers, quiet and heartbreaking. She hurried to the laundry room, finding Shadow curled in a tight ball, his body shaking. "Shadow," she whispered. He didn't wake. She reached out, gently stroking his head. "It's okay, boy," she murmured. "You're safe." His breathing slowed, his trembling eased, and when he finally opened his eyes, he saw her. Not Hank. Her. Lena smiled softly. "See? I told you, you're safe now." And this time, Shadow believed it a little more. Weeks passed. Shadow gained weight, his fur grew shinier, his eyes lost their dullness, and the chain was gone. The hunger was gone. The biggest change? The fear was fading. He still had moments of doubt, but when Lena called his name, he came. When she reached for him, he didn't flinch. One day, as she sat on the porch reading a book, Shadow did something unexpected. He walked over to her. He rested his head on her lap. Lena froze. Then, slowly, she ran her fingers through his fur. Tears burned her eyes, because this wasn't just trust. This was love. And for the first time in both their lives, they had found family. Shadow had spent most of his life in survival mode. Every second had been about avoiding pain, about shrinking into the shadows and hoping he wouldn't be noticed. But now, things were different. Now, he was healing. And healing wasn't easy. One morning, Lena stood at the front door holding a leash. Lena hesitated. "It's okay, boy," she said gently. "I thought maybe we could go for a walk." Shadow's heart pounded. The leash reminded him of the chain. The backyard was safe, the house was safe. But outside? Outside was too big. Outside was unpredictable. Lena saw the panic in his eyes and lowered the leash. "Maybe not today," she murmured. Shadow took a shaky breath. He hated that he was afraid, but he was still learning what it meant to be free. And freedom was terrifying. That night, a thunderstorm rolled in. Shadow had never been inside during a storm before. He was used to cold rain soaking his fur, to wind whipping through the empty yard, to lightning flashing with no one to comfort him. So when the first crack of thunder shook the house, he panicked. He darted from the laundry room to the kitchen, then the living room, his body low to the ground, his tail tucked tight against his belly. Lena ran to him. "Shadow, it's okay." But he wasn't listening. The storm roared outside. He backed into a corner, panting hard, his eyes darting for an escape. Mrs. Carter appeared in the doorway, worry on her face. "What's wrong with him?" "He's scared," Lena said, voice thick. She dropped to her knees. "Shadow," she whispered. His breathing was ragged, his body trembling. Lena didn't reach for him. She just sat there, her back against the wall, and she waited. Minutes passed. Slowly, the storm calmed. And so did Shadow. His chest still rose and fell quickly, but he inched toward her. Finally, he rested his head on her lap. Lena closed her eyes, relief washing over her. "It's okay now," she whispered, and maybe for the first time Shadow believed her. The next day, Lena tried again. She picked up the leash, but this time she didn't clip it on. She just placed it beside him on the floor. Shadow stared at it. Then slowly he sniffed it. Lena smiled. "You're so brave." Shadow wasn't sure if that was true. But the next time she picked up the leash, he didn't flinch. A week later, Lena opened the front door again. The leash was clipped on loosely, not tight, not a chain. Shadow hesitated on the threshold. His body wanted to bolt back inside. But then Lena stepped out first, and something inside him whispered, "Follow her." So he did. The first step was shaky. The second step felt strange. But the third felt free. Lena beamed. "Good boy, Shadow." The wind brushed against his fur, but it wasn't cold. The sun warmed his back, but it wasn't harsh. And for the first time in his life, Shadow walked without chains. With every passing week, Shadow changed. He learned that grass was soft, not just a place to be tied down. He learned that car rides weren't terrifying, especially when the window was open and he could feel the wind. He learned that not all hands hurt, and one day he wagged his tail without thinking. Lena and her mother sat on the porch one evening watching the sunset. Shadow lay beside Lena, his head resting on her knee. And then across the street, a squirrel darted across a neighbor's yard. Shadow's ears perked up, his body stiffened. And before he even knew what he was doing, he barked. Lena gasped. Shadow froze. Had that noise come from him? Mrs. Carter laughed. "Well, look at that." He finally found his voice. Shadow blinked in confusion. Lena grinned. "Do it again, boy." Shadow tilted his head. Then he barked cheered. Shadow's tail wagged. For the first time, he didn't feel invisible. He wasn't just some forgotten dog tied to a post. He was Shadow, and he was alive. Months passed. Shadow gained weight. His coat grew shiny. His steps became confident. The scars on his body remained, but the fear in his eyes was fading. One night, Lena lay on the floor beside him, her fingers running through his fur. "You're not the same dog from before," she whispered. Shadow rested his head against her chest. Because he knew she wasn't the same either. She had saved him, but he had saved her too. And neither of them would ever be alone again. Shadow had been free for almost a year now. A year since he had been chained. A year since Lena had found him. A year since he had learned what love felt like. But love wasn't just about safety. It wasn't just about food and warm blankets. Love was trust, and Shadow had learned to trust Lena with everything. But now, everything was about to change. The letter that changed everything. It was a quiet afternoon. The sun was setting, bathing the world in gold. Shadow lay on the porch, eyes half closed, enjoying the breeze. Lena sat next to him, flipping through a book. Everything felt normal. Then, "Lena!" Her mother's voice rang out from inside the house. Shadow's ears perked. Lena looked up, frowning. "Yeah? Come inside for a second." Lena stood, brushing off her jeans. "I'll be right back, boy." Shadow watched her disappear inside, feeling a strange unease settle in his chest. Minutes passed. Then, the front door creaked open. Lena stepped out, her face pale. Shadow's tail wagged once, but then he saw her eyes. She was crying. His tail stopped. He stood up, stepping toward her. Lena sat down beside him and took a shaky breath. Then, she whispered, "I got into the academy." Shadow tilted his head. Lena wiped her eyes. "I applied to a school last year, a special one. It's for kids who want to work with animals someday. It has training programs for vets, wildlife rescuers, even search and rescue dogs." Shadow blinked. He didn't understand all of it, but he understood one thing. Something was different. "I'm leaving in 2 months," Lena whispered. Shadow's heart dropped. Future without Lena? The next few weeks passed in a blur. Lena still played with him. She still took him on walks. But there was something sad in her voice when she talked to him. Something that sounded like, "Bye." One night, as she lay beside him on the floor, she whispered, "I wish I could take you with me." Shadow's ears twitched. "But the dorms don't allow pets." Her voice cracked on the last word. Shadow didn't know what dorms were. He only knew that Lena wasn't going to be here forever, and that hurt in a way he didn't understand. One afternoon, Lena sat on the couch, staring at a packing list. Mrs. Carter sat beside her. "You don't have to worry about Shadow," she said softly. Lena swallowed. "What do you mean?" Her mother smiled. "I'm keeping him." Lena's breath caught. "You will?" Mrs. Carter reached down, scratching behind Shadow's ears. "I wasn't sure at first, but I can't imagine life without him now." Shadow nuzzled against her hand. Lena let out a shaky laugh, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you, Mom." Mrs. Carter smiled. "I think he saved us both, sweetie." The night before Lena was supposed to leave, she curled up beside Shadow in his bed. He rested his head on her chest, feeling her heartbeat. "I love you, boy," she whispered. Shadow closed his eyes. He didn't know what would happen tomorrow, but right now she was here. And that was all that mattered. Lena's bags were packed. The car was running. Shadow sat by the door, watching. His heart told him to follow her. But then, Lena knelt down. "You're going to be okay," she whispered. Shadow licked her face, whining softly. She kissed his head, and then she let go. Shadow stood on the porch as the car drove away, his ears pinned back. For a moment, he thought she would come back, but she didn't. And for the first time in his life, he watched someone leave him out of love. Days passed, then weeks. Shadow still missed her. He still watched the road sometimes, wondering when she would come home. But he wasn't alone. Mrs. Carter took care of him. He still had his bed, his walks, his home. And then, one day, the mail arrived. A letter. Lena's name was on the return address. Mrs. Carter smiled. "This one's for you, boy." She opened it and pulled out a picture. It was of Lena, sitting on the grass, with a puppy in her lap. On the back, she had written, "I found a new friend, but you'll always be my first. I love you, Shadow. I'll see you soon." Shadow nuzzled the picture, and for the first time since she had left, his tail wagged. Because he knew Lena would always come back.